KSA, which is at the top. Don't be fooled. Even 46, 47, this is approximately the same GDP per capita as Canada, our largest trading partner in the world, with the US, I mean. So we have a growing population. We have a population that doubles or triples based on the year in tourism. And we have a population that can afford to purchase premium products. But how did we get here? Every time I show these pictures, it just amazes me. At the far left is the Corniche in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE. The middle one used to be called Defense Roundabout. This is the major artery in Dubai, but it looks nothing like this today. And then to the right is the fledgling Dubai airport. Now, if I were to have added the New York skyline to this, or the Paris Champs-Élysées to this in the 70s to 90s, today there'd be some changes, but more or less they'd be the same thing. This today is Dubai. Okay, you see where we were in the 90s? This is where we are today. Everyone knows the iconic Burj Khalifa. Dubai, look at the Dubai airport, the busiest international airport by passenger traffic in the world. Look at the Abu Dhabi coastline that you saw the picture where there was nothing. So basically, I could talk for the entire hour about the implications of going from this to this in a short number of years. So what is happening in this area? What are the regional macro issues? Well, what brought about all the wealth? Oil. Oil was found. Saudi Arabia still has the largest reserves of oil in the world. The UAE has oil. Dubai really doesn't have oil anymore. They weren't as lucky on that. Abu Dhabi, the capital, yes, still has oil, but Dubai does not. So they were forced with saying, what do we do with our petrodollars? How do we diversify our economy into something more sustainable? And so the big three were trade, international trade, tourism, and transportation. And pretty much they're linked, because if you want tourism, you got to have a way to have people here. So transportation is very important. If you want to do international trade, you also have to have transportation. So the three really work together. Water conservation is a top priority for this region. Future of oil, oil is finished. What we're waiting for now is what is going to be the new energy source. As soon as we have it, oil will fall away. How do you manage population growth in a sustainable manner? You saw the 90s and the pictures. No hospitals, no schools, no infrastructure, no nothing. Today, you have 10 million people in this country. How do you plan for that? How do you feed them? Which leads me to the bottom line, securing the food supply. It's on the national agenda of every government in this region. And if you look at the visual, you can see why. Does this look like land that's good for growing things? Don't think so. You might see the hot sun kind of peeking around in the right-hand quarter. It's hotter than hell, excuse my language here, 110 degrees in the summer. And guess what? We have no rain. So this is like the perfect storm. There's almost no agriculture here. 85 to 90% of all food is imported. Think about that. That's like a statistic that will blow your mind away. Think about if in the United States, 90% of everything you were eating was imported from somewhere else. But that's the reality here. Now, in Saudi, that's the reality in the UAE. In Saudi, there's some places where, yes, they can grow. In Oman, there's places, yes, they can grow. But overall, a very high percentage of everything we eat is imported from around the world. And we don't have to look any further than the crisis with the Suez Canal this week. I don't know how many of you are keyed into the global supply chain and the containers, but the Suez Canal is a key trade route that was completely shut down because there was a sandstorm and high winds, and a container, a cargo ship with tons of containers got turned sideways and was stuck, which put a threat to the food supply. A few years ago, I remember there was volcanoes going off in Iceland, and it was the same situation. No food could be coming from Europe because there was no airplanes because of the volcanic ash. Quickly, everybody had to source from Africa. Kenya was like a big country. Obviously, we have an economic slowdown over this last year. Oil prices go up and down, yes, but obviously the pandemic, COVID, has really put it's calmed down the trade figures. And then the last thing that's just an overall food industry challenge is value-added tax. So it started out in the UAE in 2018, then UAE, and then Saudi also came on 5% 2018. Bahrain followed suit. Saudi increased to 15%, and Oman, in theory, is going to start having a value-added tax next month of 5%. So we'll see how that plays out. Emma?
Unmuted, great. So COVID, like everywhere in the world, we were impacted. At this time last year, we were actually in the midst of a full lockdown. So in the UAE, you had to have an electronic pass that you took with you to go on the streets to go grocery shopping. At one stage, it was that you could only go out once a week to go grocery shopping. And in addition to that, we had curfews at nighttime. So there was no way of going out at nighttime unless you were an essential worker and you had to have permits for that. So it was really interesting to see how the government pivoted so quickly to get a pass in place and to manage COVID. And people here, we did what we were told. We wore masks straight away. So they managed to get on top of COVID really quickly, which was really important because whilst we've talked about oil being important in the region, the other major pillars of the economy are travel, tourism and transport. So they needed to get it on top of it so they could be open as quickly as possible. So our hard lockdown in the UAE lasted around 4 or 5 weeks, and then they gradually started to open up and ease restrictions to a point that they would have been, I think, one of the first, or if not the first country in the world open for tourism and travel without a quarantine period required. And that changed throughout the last year in terms of testing and what you needed, and depending on what country you came from, if you had to quarantine. But for a number of countries from day one, when they were open back up to international travel, you were able to come here for tourism because they needed to be to balance the health risk to the community, but be open so the economy could get ticking along again. And this is so Dubai was in contrast to other regions, or Emirates as we call them in the UAE, who had slightly different approaches. So Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the UAE, they're still a bit more restricted now, so they're open for tourism, but there's a quarantine period required to enter Abu Dhabi, 2 weeks. And you actually can't travel that easily between the Emirate of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but it is still possible. So in terms of vaccinations, we're doing really well in the UAE, and that goes back to they need to be open for tourism. So already 50% of the population has been vaccinated, and I'm pretty sure we have like every single vaccination that exists available in Dubai. But once again, that differs between Emirates. And I was talking to Victoria about this earlier today, and she was saying it's the second highest vaccination rate in the world. And there are, so which is great. So, and then Dubai and the UAE today, they announced that they're actually going to be manufacturing Sinopharm, the Chinese vaccination. and they're pegging themselves as a vaccination hub. So vaccination tourism or corporate travel to come here to be vaccinated. In terms of events and what's happening, so we're actually back at a stage in the UAE that you are able to attend live in-person events. So last month we attended Gulf Food, which is certainly the biggest food event in the region, but also in the world, one of the biggest ones in the world as well. It was obviously smaller than previous years, but we were there in person talking to people, which was fantastic. In terms of how freight, logistics, how that was impacted, it wasn't. So those industries were deemed essential workers, and they continued to work throughout even the hard lockdown. Emirates pivoted to air freight, so they were sending empty passenger planes and filling them up with freight, so literally boxes of freight on the seats, and then converting some of their passenger planes into more freighter planes as well. And the ports were open and busy. In terms of, well, how did COVID actually affect the F&B industry? So from a food service point of view, it was really interesting because obviously because we couldn't go out, so dining was closed in terms of dining in restaurants. And we have a huge number of fine dining establishments in the UAE from all across the world, fantastic restaurants. And so they actually had to pivot and move to food delivery. So the UAE, it's one of those fabulous places that you can get everything delivered. We were used to food delivery and having pretty much everything delivered before COVID. You want a can of Coke and that's it, you can have that delivered. But we weren't used to fine dining. So that was an example of how the industry did change, but people continue to order food like they did previously before as well. Although sales did drop, so 9 out of 10 F&B operators reported a decrease of 20% in sales, and 1 in 3 40% or more. Although they're hoping that those figures will be boosted, and they are starting to be boosted now in 2021 as restaurants are full again because tourism numbers are picking up. But we have one big event that was rescheduled that was planned for 2020, which was Expo 2020. And that's now happening in 2021. And that's like the Olympics. So it's an event that's held every 4 years in a different location, and Dubai had it for 2020. And that will bring huge numbers in. Probably not as many as what was originally anticipated, but still it should be the boost for the food service sector. In terms of retail, that's where there was huge growth in terms of the online, the e-commerce side of it. So prior to COVID, it's something that certainly frustrated me as an individual, but I think a lot of people in the region, it was difficult to actually have reliable online groceries. And that changed. So the big guys had to pivot to being able to deliver your groceries online. But what happened because of COVID and still is in place is the ability to sample, so tasting. So that's still not happening, unfortunately, and we're really looking forward to that being brought in eventually, like we hope it will be. So UAE had a very different response to COVID to the other countries in the GCC. And to give you an example of this, so you're looking at Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia in this image here. And that's where the Muslims have their pilgrimage each year, which is called Hajj. It's the major pilgrimage. And there's over millions of people, a couple of million people each year. And so the next slide, you can see that is still Mecca. So that was in 2020, what Hajj looked like. So Saudi was closed, a completely different response to the UAE. They're still closed. They open for a little bit. Borders are like, it's changing all the times in terms of what the borders are doing. There were restrictions on air, land and sea transport. Like the UAE, dine-in restaurants were closed and then they're open and then they're closed again. So numbers there were a lot more dramatic in terms of sales and how down they were. So we were getting reports of up to 80%. Like in the UAE, there was a shift towards retail, no surprise. QSR had relatively good business, but fine dining, absolutely not. What's been interesting out of Saudi is the demand for healthy food and beverage products, which has been similar to the UAE, but more so in Saudi because we didn't see it before COVID. And there's been no travel or trade shows to Saudi, which has meant we've got clients in Saudi, we haven't been able to go and visit them. But what has been really great for Saudi and the whole region is this shift to online learning, to video calls, because that was not how you did business prior to COVID. Everything was done in person. So we're seeing a real shift in the region as to how business is being done. So as you can see in the charts there, it was relatively stable for 2018-19 in terms of the exports of ag products from the US to the region, and the drop off because of COVID, as one would expect.
Yep, so that was great. And so I think one of the interesting things about this chart is also, it's once again a reminder that Saudi Arabia and UAE are definitely the two most important countries within the GCC market. And also, I think the reason the UAE seems to have been hurt a little bit more is because overall, the UAE is considered the most advanced country in terms of food trends and what's new in the region. Everyone comes here to see, what's happening and then to bring it back to their own country. Most of you will probably start your export activities with the UAE and then, spread out to Saudi will be your next market. Qatar is a small but very profitable market as well. So just so you don't get lost on where we have made progress to our agenda, now we're going to move into the heart of the food agenda. And again, I just want to remind you, we can't cover it all in an hour. So we're going to go into channels of distribution, and I'll make some comments about product categories, but there's a lot more to learn. Throughout the region, there's definitely a shifting preference towards a healthier lifestyle. Emma talked about that a minute ago. We have very high levels of what we term diabesity, which is a combination of diabetes and obesity, which leads to metabolic syndrome and much worse health conditions. So definitely the demand for healthy foods is increasing. There's still not enough information. People don't really know what a healthy food is. And kind of like in other countries, i.e. the USA, you have a nice pizza in front of you, a nice French fries in front of you, or you could have broccoli in front of you. And, there's a kind of a challenge going on in your head as to what you really should be eating versus what you often choose. So that same type of dynamic is happening here. A lot of this will be won based on marketing, okay? Do not tell someone, go to the obesity section. Do not tell someone, oh, go to the section for diabetes. People will shun those sections because there's shame associated with it in this region. So it's all about healthy kitchen, sections in supermarkets that talk about health, but don't talk about diseases. There's a very wide variety of culinary preferences here because everyone is from somewhere else. Dubai has 200 nationalities coexisting in harmony every day. So when you come here, yes, you want to explore new tastes, but you also want a taste of home. In Saudi, the same trend holds true, but for different reasons. There's a higher proportion of Saudi locals or nationals, but they send their kids out for university. And when their kids go out to Europe or the US, When they come back, they want those same experiences that they had abroad, and so they bring the same tastes back. Overall, there's also an increased focus on food processing. And you might say, what? I already told you nothing can grow here. And that's true. So if a finished product is no longer in demand, there's an opportunity on the ingredients level because they import all the ingredients. Ag tech, so aquaculture, hydroponics, vertical gardening, all that stuff is really growing in importance. And private label is also on the upswing, fueled by a shift towards modern retail trade away from ma and pa corner stores. So now to kind of give it a three-pronged approach, food service. You see the growth figures there. Now, obviously with COVID, that is no longer 8.4% today. But that gives you an idea of where this region is heading. The concentration of 4- and 5-star hotels in the UAE is astounding, and there is an equal number in pipeline projects. This is where the tourism dollar comes into play, because the 4- and 5-star hotels are all excellent places for your products to be positioned. Saudi, it's the same idea, but for different reasons. Emma showed you the pictures of Hajj and religious pilgrimages. That's a huge business. But besides that, Saudi is now trying to modernize itself and offering regular non-religious tourism opportunities with different types of visas for people to come in. Well, the people that come in have to have a place to stay, they have to have food to eat, and so this is all about their diversification. Emma talked about high-end restaurants. You know, quick serve restaurants, franchise model, it's everywhere here. You will be so much at home from the brands that you know in the United States. They're all here. And then we also have very large scale catering, such as EKFC is Emirates Flight Catering. They do a tremendous amount of business day in and day out. Ship Chandlery, Costa Cruises, the Italian company, does all of their sourcing for all of their cruises in the region from Dubai. Mega projects, we saw a little bit World Expo. World Cup Soccer 2022 is coming to Qatar. So these are huge food opportunities. And this really just underlies the points that I just made about, you know, if you look to the right, all of these names, Applebee's, Olive Garden, Cheesecake Factory, you know them. You know, there's nothing new here. They are all here in the region. So there's massive opportunities with them. And then you see on the left-hand side, consumer food service, there's about 17,000 consumer food service outlets in the UAE. Full service restaurants, the 10,321, that's the 4- and 5-star hotels, and that's a key market for you. Oh, and I should add, 4- and 5-star hotels, what's so popular about them? Well, one thing that's so popular about them is alcohol. In Saudi, no, alcohol is not distributed on the open market. In the UAE and most of the other GCC countries, it is. But there are restrictions. And so on the food service side, it is 4- and 5-star hotel restaurants that allow you to have a glass of wine with your dinner or a bottle of whiskey to celebrate a friend's whatever. So life happens for expats, and there's 90% of us that are expats in this country in the hotels. So as I've already said, you know, in Saudi Arabia, you see Hajj Umrah brings anywhere between 16 and 22 million additional people to the country every year for the religious pilgrimage. So that's massive numbers. And as I said, they're relaxing the tourism rules, that'll bring more. UAE, we have about 12 million tourists a year. if you remember the beginning of this presentation, the population of the country is a little under 10 million. So we have the same number of people that are coming in as tourists. And those are some of the ways throughout the country they're billing themselves differently. Some it's outdoor tourism, some it's cultural museums, and some it's just the Dubai lifestyle. So retail. This is me in kinder, gentler days when we could go into Saudi Arabia. And Panda is the largest modern trade retail chain in the kingdom. And this is some of their private label products that we were doing some work for them. You see, it's like a hypermarket model. You see that wide aisles, lots of products on the shelf. Probably the biggest difference is there's a lot of the same product. So whereas in the US, you might have one facing or two facing of the same SKU, there you might have 7 or 8. There's a lot less variety. One of the things that Americans have to wrap their brain around is that there's competition from everywhere. Everywhere. It's really looking at, for a fresh product, what's in season in what part of the world, and that's what we're going to buy. So mangoes could be in season, in Malaysia at one point. A month later, it could be another country. So they just kind of, in the retail segment, the stores will have, these are apples from the USA, or these are cherries from Australia. And you have your choice of which ones you want. We could go on and on. There are major international retailers. So Carrefour, which is a brand maybe most of you are familiar with, is definitely here. Lulu's, which is an Indian brand, they are the largest hypermarket player. Spinneys, which is more a high-end British brand, but perfect for all of your products. And Choithrams, which is also a high-end British brand. And then everything, there's some local supermarket chains as well. So I'm not going to waste your time reading what you can read. You see the top 10 processed food exports, American exports are there. And you also see that ag exports to Saudi, US is 4th on the list after Brazil, which that's all chicken, UAE, because there's a lot of inter-GCC trade, India, and then it's the US. So we do export a lot to the region. Looking at the UAE, it's a similar thing. You see here the USA is 3rd at 9%. But when you say European Union 22%, that's a bunch of countries. That's not one country. So really India at 12%, USA 9%. And then, this is a list of the top 10 consumer-oriented products that are imported. Fresh fruit, I know that's important to a lot of people in this webinar. Food preparations, yes, check. Tree nuts, I know there's some people in that. Fresh vegetables, meat, wine, and beer. So these are some of the top. What does a store look like? These look a little bit like New Age. You see the purple, pink there, but that's actually because in our stores now, this is growing. So I talked about vertical gardening and ag tech. This is a Carrefour store. And now you can just you just go in and buy, instead of like a pint of blueberries or something, you have like a pint container of this lettuce growing and you just pick it out. Okay, so you just buy it directly from the store. You see here an organic section from Carrefour and organic, gluten-free, sugar-free, free from. So this again is like a healthy section in one of our supermarkets. Seafood is a huge industry here for many, many, many reasons. This is different supermarkets and showing kind of what the fresh section looks like. There are even more high-end sections than what I'm showing here, what we're showing here. But you can see there's a lot of different variety, and they do a very good job of labeling it. Some of it's coming in from the region by boat. We have living lobster coming from Canada. We have raw oysters coming from both Canada and France. Seafood is a huge industry, and in fact now we have seafood farms happening, aquaculture just happening, starting to happen now in Dubai, that they're now selling at retail as well. A couple of you were interested in the pet food segment, so that's also a very good growth opportunity in the region. People consider their pets like babies, and so you have dedicated pet stores like this Pet's Delight. You have a pet section within every supermarket, and home delivery, you know, using online shopping is very popular as well for the domestic pet industry. We also have horses, which are not really domestic pets, but we have that industry as well. And here, this was just kind of to show you for COVID, you see this woman has a sachet that says social distancing. This is one of the high-end retailers, and they have these women, when they're not at the register, they're going around monitoring people to make sure you're not too close, make sure you're following the stamps on the floor that say, you know, this is the right amount of space between people. Alcohol. Now, what you see here is, what is this? And so what's interesting is that because it is a Muslim country, and for Muslims, alcohol is haram or not permissible, all attempt to see what's inside is closed off. So if you didn't know that that was the red door and swirl label of the MMI, which is one of the 2 alcohol chains, you wouldn't know what it was, okay? And the little wooden plaque there that says MMI all the way to the left says open for license holders, because you do have to get a license, non-Muslims, and more recently, tourists. So in the past, tourists couldn't buy, but now, yes, if you're a non-Muslim tourist, you can. And this was just an example of the USA section in this particular store. And by the way, in the UAE, pork is also sold in some stores, and it's much the same thing. It's in an area where it's kind of cordoned off, you don't know what it is, and it says non-Muslims only in there. USA does a lot of promotions. These are different retail chains where we have, you know, frozen products from UK, or a, you know, Discover America Day. So that's just to show you that we are very active with other companies such as ours to do the promotional activity on behalf of US products. I'm sorry I'm going fast, but I know, you know, we only have so much time left. Food processing is an opportunity. If your products are at all geared towards that, do not neglect, neglect this market. As I said, nothing grows here. So the government is putting big emphasis on supporting the food processing industry. So if you have ingredients that go into food processing, please look at this market. And if you have technological know-how that would help them on the manufacturing side, you know, that's an even greater opportunity for you to partner with them. Ag tech, we're not going to talk about. Considerations. Sorry, I'm just going to go very quickly. UAE strength, it's the gateway to the region. US products are considered high quality everywhere in the region. USA brand recognition, very high amongst consumers. There's a fixed exchange rate with all but Kuwait. Kuwait uses a basket of currencies, but every other country is pegged to the US dollar. So that helps you in your currency conversions. Excellent shipping infrastructure. Weakness, as I said, distance, long shipping times, high freight costs. There's some specialized labeling, but you know what? Quite frankly, anywhere around the world, you're going to have to do that. I actually think this region has tried to do a good job of making it easier for you initially, because you can put paper labels in Arabic. You don't have to redesign your entire package. But branding is important here. Consumer outreach is important here. Okay, and opportunities and threats. This presentation will be available, anybody who wants to read it. Saudi, probably the same as for the UAE, but yes, dependent on food imports, yes. There's a large young population, yeah, fixed exchange, distance, freight costs, same thing. This is one, the last point on the weaknesses, preference for smaller introductory orders. Here, they don't want to buy full containers to begin with. You're thinking, I'm half a world away, will you buy a container, please? And so that's something that has to be negotiated, how you deal with introductory quantities. We're getting there. Route to market. So there are many routes to market. Most of you will work with an importer and or distributor. They will help you with most of your paperwork, and they will help you to build your brand. However, they don't do it all. You still need to have eyes and ears on the ground. Whether it's your own people or a company that you hire, you need to have somebody here managing that, that network. If you don't take that route, you might work with a consolidator. There are many consolidators in the US that service this region. And so the advantage to you is you charge in dollars and get paid in dollars. The disadvantage is you don't really know what's happening to your product once it leaves, because it is the property now of the consolidator, and he just distributes it where he wants. So you're not really doing sustainable business development, but you are making sales. And then the large chains, if the quantity is sufficient for containers, they'll buy directly from you. And if it's not, they may ask you to work through a consolidator. They may ask for a different route. And private label, we've talked about that. And obviously there's a lot of nuances here, but this is an overview. The only thing I want to add on this is a container takes 4 to 6 weeks coming from the US. It can take a couple of months coming from the US. Right now, there appears to be a shortage of containers, and there seems to be a lot of congestion on the west coast of the US. We've been working with the client now who is from the West Coast, but it's actually faster to ship product from the West Coast in the US to the East Coast in the US by truck or train, whatever. And then we send it by cargo from the East Coast. So we have to be a little bit, creative in how we find solutions to shipping, because again, products are brought in from everywhere. So Europe is half the distance, half the shipping time. So you need to think about how that works into your business model. And then what is, high values, smaller volumes are brought in by air. And you would be amazed. We bring in potatoes by air, russet potatoes. You wouldn't think, but we do. So once it gets here, it's probably a week for it to get in other places throughout the GCC. If if it's destined to, some stays in UAE, some goes to Saudi, and whatever. There's a lot more to it, but again, this is the overview. On import regulations, I'm only going to say 3 words. The first is your importer is your best friend. They do this every day. They know the rules, and more importantly, the way around the rules better than anybody else. If ever there was a market where this is the way it needs to be done, but wait, if you really know someone, you can do it this way. This is the market for that mentality, okay? So your importers are your best friends. USDA has these great reports online. They will give you an overview of what to expect and what documentations are necessary. Most of them are listed right here. I'm just going to mention things that are different from probably what you're used to, especially in the US. In this country, some information does have to be in Arabic, but it can be affixed with a paper label. So you don't have to redesign your whole package, as I just said, but you will need to have a translation into Arabic of some of the key information, things like what is the official customary name for the product, what's the ingredient listing, but not the entire nutritional panel. You don't have to have that. Halal is for Muslim what kosher is for Jews. Okay, so it's a religious requirement, a way of slaughtering meat protein. There are halal certifiers in the United States that have agreements with this region, so you can use them if you need to get a halal certification. Exactly the same thing for organic. USDA organic is recognized here. You still have to jump through some paperwork, but it is recognized. And this red point down here really has to do mostly with meat and things like that. The things that in Saudi are not compatible. So, we may almost make it in under the timeline. Washington State success stories. These are just a few of the companies that we know have had success in this market. So if we look at some of the agricultural products, Washington State apples, you'll see here in this bottom image here, this is the Washington State logo. And this is one of the main arteries, not the busiest one, but the one that people travel a lot. And you'll see there's, a month-long brand awareness for Washington State apples, and they are available in our retail stores. Pears, Washington State pears, if you look up here, this Guinness World Record, this was something done by the Culinary Guild in association with the Culinary School, and they had the most pear tarts ever made in the same line. And so it was certified by the Guinness Book of World Records, and US pears got some recognition for that. And then Washington State potatoes, russets. In the middle one here, you'll see this land of year-round reliability. This woman works for the importer who is doing a lot of work right now with us actually on bringing potatoes, and this entire 40-foot container of fresh potatoes came from Washington State just recently. Processed products, French fries, absolutely. We don't exactly know which is Washington State, which is from another, but fries definitely here. You see this Da Vinci Gourmet. They actually been doing work in Saudi and now are coming to the UAE. So that's more of a specialty product that has penetrated the market. And then alcohol, we saw the other photos, but when you look here, all of these products are Washington State lines, all of them in this USA section. Plus there is also some sparkling wine that's also from Washington State. Right. Next steps, opportunities. So I know this was a little bit rushed because we're excited about all we have to say, and there's a lot to fit in. So for those of you who think this was interesting enough to move to the next step, individual consultations is pretty much what's happening next in this kind of a movement that we're working on. And if you are looking at doing things on your own, these are some upcoming events and trade shows in the region. So Gulf Food Manufacturing, Dubai, November. If you're in the ingredient side of things, that will be a live event. Next February, so almost a year from now, will be the regular Gulf Food, World Expo, and there are opportunities there for food and beverages, is the 6-month World's Fair that happens every 4 or 5 years. And in Saudi, we have a couple of, trade shows, retail and food service that are slated to happen at the end of this year. And then, as I think somebody said earlier, World Cup Soccer in Doha 2020. These are big opportunities to feed people. I don't know that we have time, but let's just do this really fast.
Let's just jump in the water. I think we should all let's definitely go out. Are you kidding? Gosh, it's beautiful. Sorry to take your picture without asking. It looked so cool. Do you like George? Is this magical place? It's my best friend. I gotta go today. Just one more day. Today. You know what's always doing that? And she suggested that we go on a little adventure tonight. Guys, where are you taking us? That's okay.
So this was a tourism promo piece that was done by the UAE. And this next one, and then this is the last thing before we open it up for the Q&A, is a tourism piece for Saudi. And for this one, I think that we need to think about, this is directionally where they're trying to take the country. I'm not sure they're actually there today, but this is their vision.
Every road you've never traveled, every dress you've never worn, every breath you've never taken, every story you've never heard, every thrill you've never had, every dish you've never tasted, every beat you've never felt, every welcome you've never known. Welcome to a journey you've never imagined. Welcome to Arabia, Saudi.
And that is the end of this presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we'll all come back to being little boxes talk. So I don't know what you're seeing now.
Okay, so we're back as tiles on the screen. And so we've got an opportunity for some question and answer time. If anybody has a question they want to ask, if you want to go ahead and down at the bottom in reactions, you can raise your hand or you can turn your camera on and jump right in. I've got a couple of questions and I'm going to start with Joe because he emailed me a question earlier this morning. Joe, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was great and a great overview of the market, and look forward to seeing more like this. But one question I have, we work with bulk commodities, and so it's a little bit different in that we're not shipping by container for the most part. But here in Washington, wondering what the bakery sector is doing, and in particular, looking at confectionery products. Are we here typically trends toward cakes, cookies, and crackers? And so on the confectionery side and that ingredient sector, what is happening there?
Thank you. Lot. Yeah, I'll give my take first, and Emma, if she wants to add anything. A lot is happening. You know, these are categories that are high demand. and also high demand for newness. Kids here are, it sounds weird to say like God, but you know, they're revered and big families. And so like bulk packs is a thing, not because you're buying for a small restaurant like in a Costco started out, but because you have a big family. So products for kids are really, it's a really excellent niche to be in. But confectionery products for everybody is a great niche to be in. I'm not sure if you're in the keto side, maybe a little bit. Was that you or not somebody else?
Not
No,
me.
okay, that's somebody else. Okay, yeah. So you know, confectionery. And then so what more specifically? Because it's a big category.
Yeah, so we would look at, I mean, typically what we would gear our wheat toward is cakes, cookies, and crackers. But we would be sending over bulk wheat. So, you know, kind of falling in that line is what the milling industry has the capacity to take on as well. We're soft wheats, which, you know, take some adjustments to the mill. So, but that's what we would be looking at in particular, is on that cakes, cookies, and crackers.
Okay, yeah. I mean, as categories, those are very important categories. And there are manufacturers here in those. IFCO, does the name IFCO mean anything to you? IFCO is a major food manufacturer. They're in a lot of different categories, but cookies, crackers is one of them. And the market is in a lot of different places. You have everything from very basic commodity style products to very ultra high-end bakery cookies, cupcakes that are quite expensive. And packaging, the marketing becomes very important as well. You know, it's gone way beyond what is the product inside, but what does the packaging look like? What does the store look like? Now I know maybe you don't have to deal with those things if it's just on the ingredients, but it's definitely big business. There never used to be ingredient distributors, right? We didn't have that. You didn't even know how to access really. So now we have dedicated distributors that are on the ingredient side, and they have food technologists. And so like we were working with someone who's reformulating a potato bun recently. So there is a lot of that is going on. And again, the more you are able to be the expert and not just say, you know, we have wheat, but here's what our products or our ingredients are, and here's how we think, how it's been used in other applications, and here's how we think it could help or provide a point of difference to your industry, that's the best of all cases.
Yeah. And to add to that, we had a lot of interest at Gulf Food from the 4 ingredients from manufacturers. And I don't know if Tora, you said, and possibly it was in the presentation, but the majority of the manufacturers are actually in Saudi, and a lot of them have joint venture relationships with big US companies. Like, so when Victoria was saying IFCO, like, so you've got PepsiCo, all the big guys there already. UAE has it as well, not so much the joint ventures there in Saudi, and then they distribute to this region. But a lot of interest across the region from the UAE, and also QA and Bahrain as well, across the GCC.
Great, that's really good to know. Thank you for your input.
Well, I'm going to throw out another one. We've got, let's see, 2 or 3 folks on here who are really focused on animal feed products. And I know you mentioned a little bit about that in the presentation, but let's see, we've got some feed ingredient, hay type product. Anything that you might share kind of above and beyond on that front?
So, as the expression goes, hay is for horses. And that horses are one of two revered animals in this region. Falcons are one, horses are the other. And there's no cost spared, no expense spared to provide the best for horses. So, you know, I believe US hay is actually a very high quality. I'm not an expert on the hay market, but I think US hay, and maybe in particular Washington State, provides very high quality hay that is in demand here. I know there is a joint venture with one Washington State company, with a joint venture here with another Abu Dhabi based company to provide feed not only for horses but also to camels and goats and sheep. So that is the good thing about that market, is it's small and concentrated. You know, it's not too fragmented. There's just a few players, and so you just have to provide, you know, the right level of pricing, quantities, and marketing. Why is my product better? But there is definitely a demand for those products. In Saudi, there is as well. I can't remember. Saudi has a lot of like weird bidding things that they do, where they'll put out to tender, and so you have that one time frame to get in on it. But I'm not sure that that is for feed ingredients as well. For some commodities it is, but I'm not sure how that works. I'll have to investigate a little bit more on that. And I see a question here, what about seafood? That's one of my favorite categories. Yeah, please come. Seafood, it's odd when you look at the desert, and so you think, well, it must be all about lamb and meat, that, you know, the nomadic lifestyle. But in fact, that's really not true. You know, this region is on the coast. And so, you know, always surrounded by water. And in fact, traditionally, the pearl diving industry was one of the very first industries in this country and in this region. They just clipped their nose and dove down and, you know, got the pearls from the oysters. So there's a strong affinity for seafood. Now, obviously, seafood goes into so many different areas that it's hard to be specific. You saw some pictures at retail. On Friday, we have brunch before COVID. For a year, we haven't been able to have brunch. But Friday is like our Sunday. So on Friday, there are every 5-star hotel has lavish brunches. And they have these raw bars that stretch the whole length of a room. And, you know, it's a fixed price, champagne, free flowing champagne, as much as you can eat. So there is a, you know, food service on Friday brunches. There's a lot of business. And then of course the restaurant industry in general has a lot. In terms of the distribution cycle, it's fairly well developed. There are 3 or 4 key importers that deal with fresh seafood. And, you know, it's really with one of those 3 or 4 that you need to get in. And they've got the tanks and they've got all the, you know, facilities to manage that. On frozen, there's more option because obviously we're dealing with a longer shelf life. But in terms of market, yeah, definitely there is one. Wild caught, yeah, good. And you guys out in Washington State should be able to do that. You know, there's a story to tell with the whole big Pacific Ocean. And that's how we would have to eventually, from a marketing perspective, play it. Don't just be like Norwegian farm-raised salmon, for example. You know, be about the Pacific wild salmon, for an example.
We've got another question about, so I'm just going to read this. This is from the unsweetened tooths, Jew Sharp. With the keto products, how would shipping work? Because the product has to be frozen. And sometimes there's a challenge with, with sending in that way, particularly if it's air freight or, if it's smaller shipments, that might be a bit of a challenge.
It might be, that's something we have to look at. What I can tell you, and Emma, I'm not sure if you're in that market as well, keto is one of those latch words that people just, oh, I have to have keto product, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to lose weight, without even necessarily understanding all the ins and outs of it. Retailers have a hard time finding enough good keto products. There are also a lot of home delivery, mom keto or something like that. I can get the exact references where they do home delivery of keto. So yeah, you got a frozen product. Okay, so you know that. And you have to make sure the temperature is controlled properly. But it's a category that's got premium pricing attached to it. And so if it's the right products, I definitely could see it working. Emma, sorry, what were you going to add?
I was going to say, all those sorts of keto, all those health sort of movements, it's, as we've said, it's all growing, and it's really growing quite rapidly. And there's a lot of homegrown businesses popping up here, but a lot of international exports being brought in as well. Coming from Australia, I've always had a really healthy lifestyle, and I was used to eating like that back home. When I moved here, I found it really challenging. And so I'm only talking 5 years ago, and I used to scour the retail supermarkets for products, and now you're just inundated with choices. You can get everything to deliver to you. You can get it from the supermarkets. It's on restaurant menus now. So there's restaurants opening up to target that segment. So it's definitely popular. And I think in terms of how it's delivered, we have a lot of high-end products here already, and the distributors, the retailers are getting good at ensuring that products are getting to the customers in the manner that they should be delivered.
Thank you. We have another question here asking, how does the trail mix market look?
It depends on who you are, what you are, and what your marketing is. This country loves nuts and dried fruits, loves. So much product is imported from Iran. There is a whole souk, as we call it, the bulk commodity market of all those types of products. And it's mostly controlled by Iranians. So it's huge business coming back and forth. Iran is a few hours away, even by boat. So it is a huge market for that's bulk product. Now, when we start talking packaged, retail packaging, it is a little bit crowded, I have to be honest, in the supermarket aisle. But it also depends, what is your point of difference? There are these kiosks in malls that are al Rafai, trail mixes that you can just buy. I'll take this, that, or the other. So they have them. The positioning is just an Arabic brand, but it's nothing, so interesting. The whole idea of antioxidants. So I don't know if the trail mix has kind of more exotic berries, the goji berries or wild cranberries or something like that. Those would be things to think about. So, I'd have to really understand a little bit more, I think. Emma, any other thoughts about that?
Well, I'm just you've seen some amazing success stories from businesses that have been able to get their product on Emirates, that's for sure, in terms of that segment.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Yeah, okay, and we didn't really talk about that. But Emirates first class, business class, they have goodie baskets during the flights, and most of the flights are long haul, right? So there is a great way to get your brand recognition known. You will make no money doing business with them from that, truthfully. But what you're getting, like they will negotiate down to the last penny. But what you're getting is, the marketing and the reference with being associated with one of the most known and respected brands in the region. And then the other thing could possibly be the mini bars, because all of the 4- and 5-star hotels, are here. They all have big, lavish mini bars. There could be an opportunity there, actually.
And I think there's a real change to the youth market with travel as well. So wanting those sorts of things in their mini bars as well. So they want those sort of like healthy, different options, not your traditional trail mixes. So those brands are now opening up in Dubai, where it was more established sort of brands that we saw before. You're getting those youth focused ones.
Right.
Let's see, we also have, how about beverages, non-alcoholic beverages?
What kind?
I'm gonna go with one of the companies that's on here. It's a sparkling cider product.
That's a non-alcoholic or
Non-alcoholic.
non-alcoholic? Okay. Cider, I think, is a really interesting question in my mind. Apples don't grow here. I mean, everybody knows what apples are, but they don't grow here. So a lot of people haven't had that childhood experience of, going to the local local apple orchard, and then you could always have the apple cider right there in front of you. So I think apple cider and sparkling apple cider could be very interesting for a few different reasons. One, because it does have a good taste. And so if you can associate that with apples that have some kind of a recognition, that's good. Two, sparkling cider is basically a non-alcoholic champagne. And let's not forget, we are in Muslim countries where some of the population doesn't drink, but still wants to partake. If we're having a party at our house and we have both Muslim and non-Muslim friends, we'll have both champagne available and then a non-alcoholic version of that. So yeah, definitely could be. I talked to my wine guy last week and asked him about hard cider. Like, where is that? And he said it's about 5% of their sales, which is not much, but he said people don't know what it is. The Brits do, because there are some strong hard cider brands from the UK. But other than that, most people don't really know. And Stella Artois has also a hard cider, but most people don't know what it is. And the Southeast Asians, so the Filipinos and those populations that have not enough money to buy like champagne or, a real vintage wine, but they could buy the cider and that have probably an affinity for that. Like, there could be a good market to grow.
And I think boutique brands as well. So traditionally here, particularly in the UAE, because it's where you can drink still, or can drink, it's been big brands. So it's been the big liquor companies importing alcohol in here, and there hasn't been a lot of variety. Like if you're used to in your home countries having those boutique suppliers, we're now starting to see it. So a little bit in the main bottle shops in Dubai, but there's other Emirates that are more known for their bigger supply of alcohol. You don't need an alcohol license. So you can drive there, and now you're seeing craft beer, craft ciders starting to infiltrate the market, which until literally this year, you're just not seen on the shelf. Like my husband's a beer lover, and as soon as we saw it, we had to drive down to the bottle shop to make sure we got some of this craft beer, because he was just dying for it. And so that same with cider as well. We'll generally get a carton of cider. So there's definitely a market there. People want to experience different things. And just before COVID, they actually had their first craft beer festival in Abu Dhabi. I might have had ciders as well, I can't recall. But you are seeing that market changing here, going from big brands to people want to have those boutique experiences with their alcohol and have something that's not known.
On that front, Emma or Victoria, what about the craft spirits? Do you see much of that?
Same. Exactly the same.
Emma, I don't know whether you can see the question, but I thought I would let you answer it first about citrus forward gin, barrel aged gin. And of course, I'm thinking of the Indian fusion La Mer place, but tell us.
Yeah, look, gin, like everywhere else in the world, like they've caught on here in terms of the gin craze. We do have one of my favorite restaurants in Dubai has the best gin bar in the country. The range is not as good as what it is in other countries, but they do, like, even this year, I know in some of the big hotels they had like gin festivals, so like the big brands were doing gin festivals. So there is an interest in the region for it. And once again, like in those bottle shops that I was talking about that we go and get the craft beer from, they have an excellent selection of gin there as well. So people know where to go to get the more boutique things. And anyone that drinks in the UAE knows which bottle shops you go to. And it's the discussion of every dinner party of where you got the alcohol from.
Right. Because I'll just add to that. I definitely do think there's an opportunity for these kind of specialty spirits. And it's my next exploration, actually. As I told him, I really want to explore that a little bit more, just for my own personal taste. But we do have two major retailers in the UAE for alcohol, but they have many points of sale. So the competition is kind of focused in that way. However, people like Emirates Airlines, they don't go through those importers. They import directly. So there are more sales opportunities than one might think if you look just at who are the retailers. And then there are the unofficial, non-formal retailers that are also like our barracudas. They're kind of illegal, but they're not really illegal. And that's where you get the best deals also. And they have like excellent, knowledgeable people, selling the most high end. There's at least 35 vodka selections, I would say, So there's definitely an opportunity there.
There's definitely a market for it. I think one of the challenges when we were talking about shipping before and how that can impact the product, I think alcohol is something to be considerate of and think about when you're talking to the importers, is making sure the storage and handling is correct. As Victoria talked about in the presentation, you have extreme heat here, and it can be shipped correctly in terms of if it needs to be in refrigerated containers, but then it's like what happens on this end. So it's having those discussions all the way through to the retailer and making sure it's stored, so when the consumer picks it up, they're experiencing the product how they should be.
Well, and I think that would be really important also for the folks on the line who are fruit and vegetable folks, and even with some of the processed products, and probably even with some of the shelf stable.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Really everybody. And it's not only a USA thing. Anybody shipping here from around the world, you have to be cognizant of that. It's probably why home delivery and online in the food industry never took off before, because it's more complicated. But during COVID, we had to try to figure it out a little bit better. So.
All right. Well, we are right at our time here. And so I will say thank you so much, Victoria and Emma, for all the information you've shared with us today. Thank you, everybody who is on the line, and the folks. I know there were a couple of people who had to get off a little bit earlier. But again, thank you. As Victoria mentioned, the slides will be available after, and we do have a recording that we'll have available. And then we do have the consultations that the registration is out for. So if you haven't signed up for the one-to-one consultation, great opportunity to learn more specific to your product line and what you're looking at doing in the GCC region of the Middle East market. So thank you, everybody. And with that, we will close.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.